The year 2060 began with unprecedented promise. Humanity stood at the precipice of technological singularity, with breakthroughs in quantum computing, neural interfaces, and artificial intelligence accelerating at an exponential rate. It was against this backdrop of optimism that the United States initiated what would become the most significant scientific gathering in human history. On a classified artificial island 300 miles off the Atlantic coast, shielded by advanced cloaking technology and guarded by the most sophisticated security systems ever devised, the International Scientific Conclave commenced. 312 of the world's brightest minds had been secretly transported to this state-of-the-art facility, representing 37 nations and every major field of scientific inquiry. Dr. Elena Petrova, a Russian quantum physicist with 3 Nobel Prizes to her name, adjusted her neural interface as she reviewed the latest data from her experiment on quantum entanglement across macroscopic distances. Beside her, Dr. Rajiv Sharma from India was demonstrating his breakthrough in neural mapping technology, capable of transferring complex motor skills between subjects through direct brain-to-brain interface. In the robotics pavilion, Dr. Mike Rodriguez from the United States put the finishing touches on his latest creation, an autonomous drone swarm capable of self-organization and collective problem-solving. Meanwhile, in the weapons development wing, Japanese engineer Kenji Tanaka unveiled his prototype plasma containment system, a technology that could theoretically make fusion power portable and efficient. The conclave represented humanity's greatest hope for solving its most pressing challenges: climate change, resource scarcity, disease, and the ethical dilemmas posed by artificial general intelligence. Here, national interests were set aside in pursuit of knowledge that would benefit all humanity. Security was paramount. The island itself was a marvel of engineering, self-sustaining, with its own fusion power plant, water reclamation systems, and defensive capabilities. A perimeter of autonomous underwater drones patrolled the surrounding waters, while above, an array of kinetic and energy weapons provided protection against aerial threats. Only submarines with the proper quantum encryption keys could approach within 50 miles without being destroyed. Inside the facility, every scientist was accompanied by a security detail from their home country, all coordinated under the command of General Marcus Thorne, a decorated military strategist with extensive experience in special operations. Everything looked secure, Thorne reported to the Pentagon via a quantum-encrypted channel. The scientists are making remarkable progress. Dr. Rodriguez's drone swarm has already solved 3 complex optimization problems that have stumped our best supercomputers for years. Understood, General, replied Secretary of Defense James Chen. Maintain vigilance. The stakes couldn't be higher. What no one on the island or in any government on Earth could have predicted was that the greatest threat wouldn't come from human conflict or technological malfunction, but from beyond the stars. At precisely 14:32 Eastern Standard Time, the sky fractured. Not with fire or thunder, but with an unnerving silence that seemed to absorb all sound. Scientists paused in their work, security personnel reached for their weapons, and General Thorne rushed to the command center. "What's happening?" he demanded, his eyes fixed on the main display screen. "Sir, we're detecting nothing," replied Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins, her fingers flying across her console. "All our sensors are reading normal atmospheric conditions, but the sky, it's changing." Thorne looked up at the main view screen, which displayed a live feed from the island's exterior cameras. The sky was indeed changing, developing a dark, triangular shape that seemed to grow larger by the second, yet without any detectable object creating it. "Run full spectrum analysis," Thorne ordered. "I want to know what we're dealing with." Before Jenkins could comply, the triangular shape resolved itself into a vessel of impossible dimensions, a black, triangular leviathan over 3 miles wide, hovering silently above the island. Its surface wasn't metal or any known material. It appeared to be alive, with pulsing membranes, neural vein-like ridges, and breathing vents that exhaled cold vapor. "My God," whispered Jenkins, her professional composure momentarily shattered. "It's growing." Thorne watched in horror as the vessel continued to expand, like a living organism adjusting to its environment. "Alert all commands," he ordered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Code Black." We have an unknown hostile entity of extraterrestrial origin. As if responding to his words, the vessel began to open along its lower edge, revealing not mechanical doors but organic orifices that dilated like pupils. From these emerged figures that would haunt the nightmares of all who witnessed them. The Kalthar descended in perfect geometric formation, their bodies tall, 7 to 8 feet in height, and humanoid in shape but utterly inhuman in presence. Their skin was a seamless, light-devouring biometal that shifted from onyx to deep violet under stress. They had no discernible mouths or ears, only glowing sapphire eyes that burned with ancient, emotionless intellect. Their limbs moved with uncanny precision, never trembling, never hesitating. They emitted no sound when they walked, only a faint, subsonic hum that vibrated in human bones like dread made audible. Defensive positions. Thorn commanded, his voice echoing through the facility's speakers. All security teams, engage at will. The island's automated defense systems activated first. Kinetic railguns fired tungsten projectiles at Mach 7, energy beams lanced across the sky, and missiles streaked toward the descending figures. None reached their targets. The projectiles disintegrated before impact, as if striking an invisible barrier. The energy beams bent around the Kalthar, continuing harmlessly into the sky. The missiles detonated prematurely, their warheads neutralized by some unseen force. "Sir, our weapons are ineffective," Jenkins reported, her voice tight with disbelief. They're deflecting everything we throw at them." Thorn watched as the Kalthar reached the island's surface. They moved with terrifying efficiency, each carrying a slender black staff that activated with a soft glow. "What are those weapons?" Thorn asked. Before Jenkins could respond, the first staff discharged. There was no explosion, no sound, no debris, just empty space where a section of the island's perimeter wall had once stood. "They're atomizing matter," Jenkins said, her voice barely audible. "Gravitothermal pulses." "Sir, they're erasing our defenses." The Kalthar advanced with flawless tactics. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't negotiate. They harvested. Civilians were ignored unless they resisted. Then, they vanished in a blink. Military vehicles were disabled before they could fire, their electronics and the brains of their operators simultaneously fried by neural EMP bursts. Drone swarms were hijacked mid-air and turned against their own bases. Dr. Mike Rodriguez watched in horror as his autonomous drones turned against the security personnel, their precision targeting systems now under alien control. "Emergency shutdown," he yelled, his fingers flying across a holographic interface. "Initiate quantum cascade failure." Too late. The drones had already eliminated most of the security detail in his section. Rodriguez ducked behind a reinforced concrete pillar as plasma fire from his own creations melted the wall where he'd been standing seconds earlier. In the medical pavilion, Dr. Aisha Hassan was treating a security guard whose neural interface had been overloaded by the Kalthar's EMP attack when the doors slid open. Two Kalthar entered, their sapphire eyes scanning the room. "Get behind me," Hassan whispered to the wounded guard, positioning herself between him and the intruders. The Kalthar approached without hesitation. One raised its vapor rod, preparing to fire. Hassan closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Instead of annihilation, she felt a strange tingling sensation. When she opened her eyes, the guard had vanished, but she remained unharmed. The Kalthar were examining her identification badge and the neural interface on her temple. Dr. Aisha Hassan, a voice spoke directly in her mind, not through her ears, but as a thought that wasn't her own. "Neuroscientist. Expert in brain-computer interfaces. You will accompany us." Hassan felt her body moving against her will, rising to her feet and following the Kalthar out of the room. She tried to scream, to resist, but her limbs no longer obeyed her conscious commands. Throughout the facility, similar scenes played out. The Kalthar weren't killing indiscriminately, they were selectively targeting scientists and engineers, particularly those with expertise in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, neuroscience, and advanced weapons systems. In the command center, General Thorne watched the security feeds in growing despair. "They're taking our scientists," he said to Jenkins. "Not killing them, but capturing them." "Sir, we've lost contact with the Pentagon," Jenkins reported. "All communications are being jammed. We're isolated." Thorne made a decision. "Initiate the self-destruct sequence. We can't let them get their hands on our research." "Sir, the scientists," Jenkins began. "We'll die either way," Thorne interrupted grimly. "If we can't stop them, we'll deny them their prize." As Jenkins entered the authorization codes, the command center doors opened. 5 Kalthar entered, their vapor rods at the ready. General Marcus Thorne, the voice spoke in his mind. "Military strategist. Expert in special operations. You will accompany us." Thorne reached for his sidearm, but before his fingers could close around the grip, his body froze. He remained conscious, aware, but completely unable to control his movements. "Your primitive weapons are ineffective against us," the mental voice continued. "Your resistance is futile. Your species has reached a technological threshold that makes you valuable to us. You will serve a greater purpose." Thorne could only watch in horror as Jenkins and the other command center personnel were either taken or eliminated. The self-destruct sequence was halted, the island's defenses completely under alien control. Within 4 minutes of the vessel's appearance, the entire conclave had been neutralized. Military response had failed. Satellites monitoring the area had gone dark. The Atlantic fell silent. Aboard the Vector Prime, the captured scientists were placed in crystalline bioneural tanks, their bodies suspended in a nutrient-rich gel while their minds were siphoned for information. Of the original 312 scientists, only 101 remained alive, their expertise too valuable to waste. Dr. Aisha Hassan floated in her tank, conscious but unable to move as alien probes examined her neural pathways. She could sense the presence of other minds nearby, some panicked, some defiant, all trapped like specimens in a cosmic laboratory. The Kalthar moved through the captured facility, harvesting data and technology with methodical precision. Their objective was clear: to enhance their own intelligence and capabilities using human innovation, then establish total control over Earth within 72 hours by deploying hidden weapon caches across Earth's dead zones, the Amazon, Siberia, deep ocean trenches, and other locations where humanity rarely ventured. As the first day of the invasion drew to a close, humanity remained largely unaware of the disaster that had befallen its brightest minds. The world continued its business, oblivious to the silent war that had begun, a war not for territory or resources, but for the very intellect that defined humanity's future. In Washington, D.C., CIA agent Clara Bloom reviewed satellite imagery of the Atlantic, noting the unusual absence of data from a specific quadrant. "Something's wrong," she said to her colleague, Agent James Mitchell. "We've lost all surveillance capabilities in this sector. No signals, no heat signatures, nothing." "Technical glitch?" Mitchell suggested. Bloom shook her head. "Not likely. We have triple redundancy on all our Atlantic monitoring systems. This looks deliberate." As she continued her analysis, Bloom couldn't shake the feeling that humanity was facing a threat unlike any it had encountered before, a silent, intelligent enemy that had struck without warning and without mercy. What she didn't know was that this was merely the beginning of a conflict that would test the limits of human ingenuity, courage, and sacrifice. A conflict where the greatest weapon would be not technology or firepower, but the very essence of what made humanity unique, its capacity for irrationality, emotion, and self-sacrifice. The invasion had begun, and humanity's greatest minds were now the prisoners of an enemy they couldn't comprehend, fighting a war they didn't know existed. The silence from the Atlantic conclave lasted precisely 17 hours before the world's intelligence agencies realized something catastrophic had occurred. The first alarm was raised by a Russian submarine patrolling the exclusion zone around the classified island. "Command, this is Viper 1, Captain Dmitry Volkov transmitted through an encrypted channel. We've lost all contact with the island. No communications, no automated signals, nothing. Our sensors are detecting anomalous energy readings, but no physical signatures. In Moscow, the transmission was immediately forwarded to GRU headquarters, where General Andrei Sokolov reviewed the data with growing concern. "Send in a reconnaissance drone," he ordered. "Armed, but with stealth priority. I want to know what's happening out there." Similar conversations were taking place in intelligence agencies around the world. In Langley, Virginia, CIA Director Marcus Coleman reviewed the situation with his top analysts. "We have 312 of the world's brightest scientists on that island," Coleman said, his expression grim. "Representing 37 nations. And now, silence. Could be a technical failure," suggested Assistant Director Maria Flores. "Not with this level of redundancy," replied Clara Bloom, entering the conference room. "I've been analyzing the satellite data. There's a perfect void where that island should be, no heat signature, no radar return, no electronic emissions. It's as if something is absorbing all energy in that area." Bloom projected her findings onto the main screen. "See this? The surrounding ocean shows normal thermal and radiation readings, but in a perfect circle around the island's last known coordinates, there's nothing. It's not natural." Coleman studied the display. "What could cause this?" "Either a technological failure of unprecedented scale," Bloom said, "or something is deliberately concealing the island." "Send in a team," Coleman decided. "Your team, Clara. Take whatever resources you need. Find out what happened to our people." In Beijing, a similar discussion was taking place in the Ministry of State Security. Minister Wei Chen reviewed the intelligence reports with his top advisors. "The Americans have gone silent," he noted. "The Russians are concerned. Our own assets report unusual energy readings. Should we dispatch a reconnaissance team?" asked Deputy Director Lu Ming. "Prepare one," Chen ordered. "But wait for the Americans to make the first move. If this is a trap, let them spring it." In New Delhi, Intelligence Bureau Director Arjun Sharma received the same reports and made the same calculation. The world's major powers were all aware that something had happened to the scientific conclave, but none wanted to be the first to respond aggressively, fearing they might be walking into a trap or revealing their capabilities prematurely. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic, the Russian reconnaissance drone approached the coordinates of the missing island. What it transmitted back caused shock and disbelief in command centers around the world. The island was still there, but it was changed. The familiar structures remained, but they were now surrounded by a dark, triangular vessel that seemed to absorb light itself. Smaller craft moved between the ship and the island, transporting figures that were clearly not human. "My God," breathed Captain Volkov as he watched the feed. "It's an invasion." Within hours of the drone's transmission, the world's governments were in crisis mode. Emergency meetings were convened, secure channels established, and military forces put on high alert. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency session, where representatives of the major powers agreed to an unprecedented level of cooperation. "We are facing a threat beyond anything humanity has encountered," said U.S. Secretary of State Catherine Mitchell. "We must set aside our differences and face this together." The Russian ambassador nodded in agreement. "Our reconnaissance confirms the presence of an extraterrestrial vessel. We believe they have captured our scientists." The Chinese representative added, "Our analysis suggests the vessel is biological in nature, not mechanical. It appears to be growing, like a living organism." In response to this shared threat, the world's major intelligence agencies formed an unprecedented coalition. The CIA, Russia's GRU, India's RA, China's MSS, France's DGSE, Japan's PSI, and the United Kingdom's MI6 established a joint command center with direct lines to their respective military leadership. The first action of this coalition was to send a multinational team to investigate the alien vessel and, if possible, rescue the captured scientists. The team was composed of the best operatives from each agency, led by CIA agent Clara Bloom. In a secure briefing room at an undisclosed location, Bloom addressed her team. "We know the aliens call themselves the Kalthar," she said, projecting the limited intelligence they had gathered. "They're humanoid but biologically distinct from humans. Their technology appears to be biomechanical in nature, and they possess weapons capable of atomizing matter. The team members reviewed the data with professional seriousness. Among them were Major Shaurya Mehta from India's Marco Special Forces, an expert in underwater operations and close-quarters combat. Leonid Volkov from Russia's Spetsnaz, a specialist in infiltration and sabotage. Feng Wei from China's Snow Leopard Unit, a master of unconventional warfare and psychological operations. Emily Dubois from France's GIGN, an expert in hostage rescue and counterterrorism. John Breaker Mason from the NSA, a crisis specialist who thrived in chaos and used cold logic under fire. Ichiro Tanaka from Japan's Special Forces Group, a robotics and cyber warfare expert. Dr. Mike Rodriguez, the robotics genius who had survived the initial attack on the island by hiding in a maintenance tunnel. "How did you survive?" Bloom asked Rodriguez. "I was running diagnostics on the island's maintenance systems when the attack occurred," Rodriguez explained. "The tunnel I was in was shielded by lead and copper, which apparently blocked their neural EMP. I watched through a security camera as they harvested the scientists." "Harvested?" Mason asked. "That's the only word for it," Rodriguez said grimly. "They weren't killing everyone. They were selecting certain individuals and placing them in some kind of stasis. The others, they just erased them." The team studied the reconnaissance footage carefully, noting the Kalthar's tactical patterns. "They move with perfect precision," Mehta observed. "No wasted motion, no hesitation. Like a well-oiled machine." "Or a hive mind," Mason added. "Notice how they coordinate without any visible communication. They're either telepathic or networked through some technology we can't detect. Either way, direct confrontation seems inadvisable," Bloom concluded. "We need a different approach." The team spent the next 48 hours planning their mission, which they codenamed Operation Mindstorm. The plan involved infiltrating the alien vessel using stealth technology, rescuing as many scientists as possible, and gathering intelligence on Kalthar capabilities and weaknesses. As preparations continued, the world's militaries went on high alert. Naval forces were deployed to establish a perimeter around the alien vessel, air defenses were strengthened, and satellite surveillance was intensified. But the Kalthar seemed unconcerned by these preparations. They continued their operations on the island, apparently confident in their technological superiority. In New Delhi, as the crisis team prepared for their mission, a different kind of operation was taking place. Dr. Arjun Singla, a neuroquantum physicist who had been captured by the Kalthar, floated in his crystalline bioneural tank, conscious but unable to move as alien probes examined his neural pathways. Unlike the other captured scientists, Singla had a secret advantage. As a researcher in quantum neural interfaces, he had developed a technique to shield certain thoughts from external detection by encoding them in quantum entanglement patterns. It was a theoretical method he had never tested in practice, but now, faced with the ultimate intrusion, he focused all his mental energy on creating a protected space in his mind. The Kalthar probes were thorough, extracting memories, knowledge, and skills with systematic efficiency. But they missed the encrypted corner of Singla's consciousness where he worked on a different kind of project, not resisting the intrusion, but analyzing it. The Kalthar neural interface was sophisticated, but Singla began to detect patterns in its operation. There were rhythmic cycles in the extraction process, moments when the probes focused on consolidating harvested data before beginning a new extraction sequence. During these brief intervals, the connection was less invasive, creating a potential window of opportunity. Singla focused on these cycles, counting the duration of each phase. After what felt like hours of subjective time, he identified a pattern. Every 17.3 minutes, there was a 0.8-second gap in the neurogel's suppression cycle, a moment when the probes recalibrated their frequency. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Using his quantum encryption technique, Singla began encoding information in these brief windows, hiding his transmissions in the natural quantum fluctuations of his neural activity. The data was minimal at first, just a few bits per cycle, but over time, he accumulated enough to send a meaningful message. His target was clear, Clara Bloom, the CIA operative known for her intuitive approach to intelligence analysis. He had worked with her briefly on a quantum computing project years earlier and was familiar with her analytical methods. The message needed to be encrypted in a way only Bloom could decode, hidden in layers of meaning that would appear as random neural noise to the Kalthar. Drawing on his knowledge of ancient languages and mathematics, Singla crafted his transmission. He encoded it in Hindi, disguised as Sanskrit shlokas, with mathematical formulas woven into the verse structure. The content was critical, information about Kalthar biology, technology, and psychology that he had gleaned from their neural interface. The transmission began as a series of encrypted data packets, each sent during the 0.8-second window in the probe cycle. The packets traveled through the Kalthar network, appearing as routine neural data from a captive subject. But instead of flowing to the central consciousness, Singla had found a way to route them to an external transmitter, one of the island's communication systems that the Kalthar had appropriated but not fully understood. The journey of this signal was perilous. It passed through Kalthar systems, bounced off human satellites, and ultimately reached a receiver in the Andes Mountains, one of the few locations on Earth with the quantum sensitivity to detect such a subtle transmission. In a remote CIA monitoring station, an analyst noticed an anomaly, a repeating pattern in what should have been random background noise. "Clara, you might want to see this," the analyst transmitted to Bloom, who was reviewing mission plans with her team. Bloom studied the data, her eyes narrowing as she recognized the patterns. "This isn't random," she said. "It's encrypted. Very sophisticated." "Source?" Mason asked. "Hard to trace," Bloom replied. "But the encryption method, it looks like something Dr. Arjun Singla would create. He was working on quantum neural encryption before the conclave." "Is it possible he's sending this?" Du Bois asked. "If anyone could figure out how to communicate under these conditions, it would be Singla," Bloom said. "I need to decode this." Working through the night, Bloom applied various decryption algorithms to the signal. None worked. The encryption was unlike anything she had encountered. "It's not just mathematically encrypted," she told her team. "There's a linguistic component. Sanskrit, I think, but with mathematical formulas embedded in the structure." Mason examined the data. The formulas look like quantum entanglement equations. He's using quantum states to encode additional layers of information. "It's brilliant," Rodriguez admitted. "He's hiding the signal in the quantum fluctuations of his own neural activity, using the Kalthar's own network against them." As dawn broke over the Andes, Bloom finally made a breakthrough. "I think I have it," she announced. He's using Hindi words disguised as Sanskrit, with mathematical relationships between the verses that create a quantum key. The first decoded message sent a chill through the room. Kalthar brains operate at only 50% cognitive capacity versus humans. Their blood is blue. Their food is brains. Their tech is vulnerable to paradox. "He's alive," Bloom said, a mix of relief and concern in her voice. "And he's giving us critical intelligence." Over the next several hours, more messages followed, each revealing another piece of the puzzle. They planned full planetary takeover in 72 hours. Their ship is biological, not mechanical. It grows, heals, thinks. They cannot process emotion or logic. These are their weaknesses. 72 hours from when? Mason asked, checking his watch. The attack occurred 2 days ago. We may be running out of time. We need to move up our timeline, Bloom decided. Operation Mindstorm begins now. As the team prepared for their mission, another transmission arrived from Singla, this one more urgent than the others. "They know I'm communicating. They're increasing the extraction frequency. I won't be able to maintain this for long. Remember, paradox is their weakness. Use it." The final words of the message sent a chill through Bloom's spine. "Save my mind. Use paradox." In the crystalline bioneural tank aboard the Vector Prime, Dr. Arjun Singla felt the probes intensifying their extraction. He knew his time was running out. With one final burst of concentration, he encoded a message that would change the course of the conflict, a message not of data, but of philosophy, encoded in the mathematical structure of a Sanskrit verse about the nature of consciousness. As the probes overwhelmed his defenses, Singla focused on a single thought: you are gods of math, but you do not understand love. Then, with the last of his free will, he smashed his body against the crystalline walls of his tank, shattering both the container and his own physical form. His final act of defiance created a paradox in the Kalthar neural network. A being they had captured for his intellect had willingly destroyed himself to protect that intellect. The effect was immediate and unexpected. The Kalthar AI monitoring the extraction process encountered a logical contradiction it couldn't resolve: a specimen that valued its own thoughts more than its physical existence, a consciousness that chose oblivion over exploitation. The result was an infinite loop of existential doubt that spread through the Kalthar network like a virus, proving that poetry could indeed kill gods. In the Andes, Bloom received the final transmission from Singla, a complex mathematical equation that, when properly interpreted, created a logical paradox capable of confusing Kalthar cognitive processes. He's gone, Bloom said quietly, understanding the implications of the final message. But he's given us the key to fighting back. As Operation Mindstorm commenced, the team carried with them not just weapons and technology, but a new understanding of their enemy, and a newfound appreciation for the irrational, emotional, self-sacrificing nature of humanity that might prove to be its greatest strength. The war for Earth's future had begun, and the first battle had already been won by a scientist who had sacrificed himself to protect not just his knowledge, but the very essence of human consciousness. The loss of Dr. Arjun Singla sent a shockwave through the crisis team. In the sterile briefing room of the Andes monitoring station, a moment of silence was observed for the scientist who had given his life to deliver critical intelligence. His sacrifice won't be in vain, Clara Bloom vowed, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. We'll use what he gave us to fight back. John Breaker Mason studied the final transmission from Singla, a complex mathematical equation disguised as Sanskrit verse. This is brilliant, he said, admiration evident in his tone. He's encoded a logical paradox that specifically targets the Kalthar cognitive architecture. How does it work? Asked Major Shoya Mehta, his military mind seeking practical applications. Dr. Mike Rodriguez stepped forward. From what Singla told us, Kalthar brains operate differently from ours. They're highly efficient at processing logic and data, but apparently they struggle with concepts that don't follow predictable patterns. Like emotion, Emily Du Bois suggested. And paradox, Mason added, pointing to the equation. This creates a logical loop that can't be resolved through conventional reasoning. Imagine asking a computer to calculate the square root of a negative number using only real numbers. It would either crash or enter an infinite loop. Foamway nodded in understanding. So this paradox weaponizes the Kalthar's own logical nature against them. Precisely, Bloom confirmed. But we need to understand how to deploy it effectively. Rodriguez, I need you and Tanaka to work on adapting this equation into a form we can use against their systems. Rodriguez and Ichiro Tanaka immediately set to work, their fingers flying across holographic interfaces as they deconstructed Singla's equation and began developing applications for it. Meanwhile, Leonid Volkov reviewed the tactical implications. If we can disrupt their cognitive processes, we might be able to create openings for infiltration and rescue. But we need to be careful, Bloom cautioned. We don't know how widespread the effect will be or how they'll respond to it. For all we know, it could make them more aggressive. Risk we'll have to take, Mason stated pragmatically. We're running out of time. According to Singla, they plan to complete their planetary takeover within 72 hours of the initial attack. We're already past that timeline, which means either their plan has been delayed or we're already too late. Or their definition of planetary takeover is different from ours, Du Bois suggested. They may not need to physically occupy the entire planet to achieve their objectives. Bloom nodded thoughtfully. Good point. They've already captured our top scientific minds. If they can extract and replicate that knowledge, they might not need a conventional invasion. Then we need to hit them hard and fast, Mehta concluded, before they can fully utilize what they've harvested. As the team continued their planning, Rodriguez and Tanaka made a breakthrough. "We've adapted Singler's equation into several formats," Rodriguez announced. "One is a broadcast signal that can disrupt Kalthar neural communications. Another is a physical device that can generate a localized paradox field. And the third is a cyber weapon that can be introduced into their systems through any accessible interface." "How effective will these be?" Bloom asked. "In theory, highly effective," Tanaka replied. "But we have no way to test them without alerting the Kalthar to what we're doing. Then we'll test them in the field," Bloom decided. "Which means we need to finalize our infiltration plan." The team reviewed the latest reconnaissance data, which showed increased activity around the alien vessel. Smaller craft were regularly departing and returning, apparently deploying something in various locations around the globe. "They're establishing a network," Mason observed. "Probably weapon caches or communication relays. Whatever their endgame is, they're preparing for it." "We need to get aboard that vessel," Bloom said firmly. "Rescue the scientists, gather more intelligence, and if possible, disrupt their operations from within." The infiltration plan was complex and dangerous. It involved approaching the vessel underwater, using specially designed submersibles with stealth technology borrowed from multiple nations. Once beneath the vessel, the team would use plasma cutters to create an entry point, hoping to avoid detection by the Kalthar's internal sensors. "From there, we'll split into 3 teams," Bloom explained, indicating the holographic map of the vessel. "Team Alpha, led by Meta, will focus on locating and rescuing the scientists. Team Bravo, led by Volkov, will gather intelligence on Kalthar technology and capabilities. Team Charlie, led by Mason, will deploy the paradox weapons and attempt to disrupt their command structure." "What's the extraction plan?" Du Bois asked. "That's the tricky part," Bloom admitted. "Once we're detected, extraction will be nearly impossible. We'll need to create a diversion or find another way out." "Or fight our way out," Meta suggested grimly. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Bloom replied. "But we should prepare for that possibility." As the team finalized their plans, a new transmission arrived from an unexpected source, a high-frequency burst detected by a deep space monitoring array in Australia. "It's coming from the direction of the vessel," the analyst reported. "But it's not Kalthar in origin, at least, not exactly." Bloom examined the transmission data. "It's human. One of our deep space communication protocols, but heavily modified. Who would be transmitting from there?" Mason wondered. "Maybe one of the scientists who wasn't captured," Rodriguez suggested. "Or someone who managed to avoid detection." As Bloom worked to decode the transmission, a chilling possibility occurred to her. What if it's not a human transmitting, but something using human communication protocols? The team fell silent as they considered this implication. The idea that the Kalthar might be attempting to deceive them using human communication methods was unsettling. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Bloom cautioned. "First, let's see what the message says." After several hours of intense decryption work, Bloom finally unraveled the transmission. What she found was both surprising and concerning. "It's from Dr. Elena Petrova," she announced, referring to the Russian quantum physicist with 3 Nobel Prizes. "She's alive aboard the vessel, but she's different." "Different how?" Volkov asked. "Her neural patterns have been altered," Bloom explained. "The Kalthar have somehow integrated her consciousness into their network. She's still herself, but she's also part of them." "Can we trust anything she says?" Mason questioned. "That's the problem," Bloom admitted. "She may not even be aware that she's transmitting. The Kalthar could be using her as an unwitting mouthpiece." "What's the message?" Meta asked. Bloom projected the decoded text. "They are not what they appear. Their history is not what they claim. The vessel is not a ship but a seed. They are not conquerors but survivors. There is another threat coming, something that even the Kalthar fear. They need our knowledge to face it." The team stared at the message in stunned silence. "Are they saying they're not the real enemy?" Du Bois asked incredulously. It could be a deception, Mason suggested. A way to make us hesitate or lower our guard. Or it could be the truth, Bloom countered. We've been assuming they're conquerors, but what if they're refugees? Refugees who atomize people and kidnap scientists? Volkov challenged. Desperate people do desperate things, Bloom replied. And we still don't know their true motivations. This new information complicated everything. If the Kalthar weren't simple conquerors, then their actions might be driven by something more complex than a desire for domination. We need more information, Bloom decided. And we need to be prepared. The message from Dr. Elena Petrova hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning the certainty that had fueled their mission. Refugees, not conquerors. A seed, not a ship. Another threat coming. The implications were staggering, forcing a rapid recalibration of everything they thought they knew. We need more information, Bloom had decided. And we need to be prepared for anything. That preparation took another 12 hours. The team ran simulations, adapted their gear, and incorporated Petrova's cryptic warning into their operational parameters. The core mission remained the same: infiltrate, rescue, disrupt, but the context had shifted from a straightforward war of liberation to something far more complex and morally ambiguous. They departed under the cover of darkness from a submerged platform in the Andes, transported to the Atlantic coast by a silent, high-speed maglev train. From there, they boarded the USS Neptune, a next-generation stealth submarine that moved through the water with the grace of a predator, its surface coated in a metamaterial that bent sonar and light around it. The journey to the coordinates of the Vector Prime was tense. The team moved through the submarine's corridors with quiet purpose, checking their equipment and running final diagnostics. Rodriguez and Tanaka had integrated Singler's paradox equation into 3 distinct delivery systems: a wideband emitter, a focused pulse device, and a series of cyber intrusion programs. The psychological weight of their mission was immense. They were not just soldiers, they were humanity's first line of defense against an enemy of unimaginable power, and possibly its only hope of understanding a threat even greater. As the Neptune approached the exclusion zone, the sheer scale of the Vector Prime became apparent even through the submarine's advanced sensors. It was a mountain hanging in the sky, a dark wound in the fabric of the world, its biological nature evident in the slow, rhythmic pulsing of its outer membrane. "We're directly beneath it," the Neptune's captain announced over the intercom. Commencing deployment. The team transferred to the Stingray, a smaller, even more advanced submersible designed for covert infiltration. Its hull was a hybrid of titanium and a carbon silicate composite that could withstand immense pressure and, theoretically, the Kalthar's energy weapons for a short time. Rodriguez piloted the Stingray with steady hands, his eyes fixed on the sonar display. The underside of the Vector Prime was a landscape of alien biology, with twisting, vine-like structures and massive, crystalline formations that glowed with a soft, internal light. Finding a place to breach the hull was the first challenge. They needed a location that was structurally sound enough to allow them entry but remote enough to avoid immediate detection. "There," Mason said, pointing to a section of the hull that seemed less dense than the surrounding area. "That looks like a vent or exhaust port of some kind." "Agreed," Bloom replied. "Rodriguez, take us in." Slow and easy. The Stingray glided through the water, its propulsion system generating minimal turbulence. As they drew closer to the chosen entry point, the sheer scale of the vessel became overwhelming. What had looked like a small vent from a distance was now a massive cavern, large enough to swallow the Stingray whole. The interior of the vent was lined with the same biometallic skin as the exterior, but it was softer here, more membrane-like. A faint, rhythmic current of warm, nutrient-rich water flowed out from the depths of the ship. "This is it," Bloom announced. "Team Alpha, prepare for breach. Team Bravo, get ready to move on my mark. Team Charlie, you're with me." Meta and his Team Alpha, consisting of Du Bois and 2 other special operatives, moved to the airlock. They wore specially designed exosuits that enhanced their strength and protected them from the alien environment. Rodriguez positioned the Stingray at the base of the vent. Attaching breaching charges to a living organism that might feel pain was a strange proposition, but there was no time for ethical debate. Charges set, Meta reported over the comm standing by. Bloom took a deep breath. Detonate. A series of muffled thuds echoed through the water. The biometallic membrane tore open, not with a jagged edge, but with a clean, almost surgical cut that immediately began to heal, the edges of the wound drawing together with visible speed. Go, go, go! Bloom commanded. Meta's team propelled themselves out of the stingray and into the opening, their suit lights cutting through the murky water. Bloom, Mason, and the rest of the team followed close behind. The interior of the Vector Prime was a nightmare of alien architecture. They were in a vast, cavernous space filled with a network of pulsating tubes and crystalline structures. The air, when they transitioned to an internal atmosphere, was thick and humid, smelling of ozone and something vaguely organic, like damp earth and metal. The gravity was slightly lower than Earth's, making their movements feel light and unnatural. The walls of the chamber seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a slow, deliberate rhythm. "This is like being inside a living creature," Du Bois whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of awe and revulsion. "Stay focused," Meta reminded her. "We have a job to do." According to the schematics Petrova had provided, the scientists were being held in a central chamber, a network of bioneural tanks that the Kalthar used for their extraction process. The route to this chamber was a labyrinth of organic corridors and vast, open spaces patrolled by Kalthar soldiers. The team moved with stealth, their exosuits' footsteps muffled by the soft, spongy floor. They encountered their first patrol after 20 minutes of careful navigation. 2 Kalthar soldiers moved with their characteristic uncanny precision, their vapor rods held at the ready. Mason signaled his team Charlie to prepare the paradox emitter. He held up a small, disc-shaped device, its indicator light glowing a soft green. "Wait for my signal," he transmitted over the comm. The Kalthar patrol passed within 50 meters of their hiding place behind a massive, pulsating tube. The subsonic hum they emitted vibrated through the floor, setting Bloom's teeth on edge. "Now," Mason said. He activated the emitter. A wave of invisible energy washed over the patrol. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the 2 Kalthar stopped in their tracks, their glowing sapphire eyes flickering erratically. They turned to face each other, their bodies frozen in a state of apparent confusion. "It's working," Tanaka whispered, monitoring the feedback on his datapad. "Their neural network is encountering the paradox. They're caught in a logical loop." The effect was temporary. After 30 seconds, the Kalthar shook their heads as if clearing them and resumed their patrol, their movements now slightly less precise, their formation marginally disrupted. "It bought us time," Bloom noted. "But it didn't take them out. We need to be careful how we use this." As they moved deeper into the ship, they began to encounter more of the Vector Prime's biology. Glowing fungi-like organisms clung to the walls, illuminating the corridors with an eerie blue light. Small, crab-like creatures scuttled through the shadows, apparently part of the ship's self-cleaning and maintenance systems. "They're not just living on the ship," Rodriguez observed. "They are the ship. Every part of this organism has a function. Which makes destroying it a morally complicated act," Bloom added, thinking of Petrova's message. They reached a massive, circular chamber, its walls lined with the crystalline bioneural tanks. Inside each tank, a human figure floated in a translucent gel, their bodies connected to the ship's systems by a web of glowing fibers. "Team Alpha, this is your target," Bloom transmitted. "Find Dr. Petrova and the other key scientists. See if you can safely disconnect them." Meta's team moved cautiously toward the tanks, their weapons ready. The air in the chamber was cold, the silence broken only by the faint, rhythmic hum of the extraction process. "I see Petrova," Du Bois reported, her voice hushed. "She's in the center tank. She looks peaceful." As they approached the central tank, Petrova's eyes opened. She was awake, and she was looking directly at them. "We know you're here," a voice spoke in their minds, not Petrova's voice, but something colder, more alien. The Kalthar had detected them. All hell broke loose. Alarms blared, not with sound, but with a psychic pulse that sent a wave of panic through the team. The walls of the chamber seemed to come alive, with armored plates sliding into place and weapon turrets emerging from the floor. "We've been made," Bloom yelled. "Charlie team, deploy the Paradox Pulse now. Bravo team, find their command nexus. Alpha, get those scientists out." The mission had shifted from infiltration to a desperate battle for survival. They were inside the belly of the beast, and the beast was very much awake. The psychic alarm was a physical blow, a spike of pure dread that sent Bloom stumbling to one knee. Mason, ever the crisis specialist, was the first to recover. "Charlie team, on me," he yelled, activating his exosuit's combat systems. "We need to create chaos." Team Charlie, Mason, Rodriguez, and Tanaka moved to the center of the chamber, their Paradox Pulse devices at the ready. The first wave of Kalthar soldiers poured into the chamber from multiple entrances, their movements perfectly coordinated, their vapor rods glowing with deadly energy. "Fire at will," Meta commanded his Alpha team, who were taking cover behind the bioneural tanks. Plasma fire and kinetic rounds slammed into the Kalthar, but their biometallic skin absorbed most of the damage. A few soldiers staggered, their onyx skin cracking to reveal the violet tissue beneath, but they continued their advance with relentless determination. "They're adapting," Rodriguez yelled over the comms. "Their armor is resonating to counter our weapons." Mason ignored him, focusing on the larger paradox emitter. "Eat this, you logical sons of bitches," he muttered, and activated the device. A wave of distorted reality spread out from the emitter. The air shimmered, and the very laws of physics seemed to bend for a moment. The Kalthar soldiers in the immediate vicinity froze, their sapphire eyes flickering wildly. Some dropped their vapor rods, their hands trembling uncontrollably. Others turned on each other, their movements erratic and confused. "It's working," Tanaka exclaimed, monitoring the feedback on his datapad. "Their neural network is overloading." But the effect was localized. Kalthar soldiers further away were unaffected, and they quickly adjusted their tactics, moving to flank the source of the disruption. "We can't hold this position," Bloom stated, her mind racing. "Alpha team, how's the extraction going?" "Petrova is refusing to leave," Dubois reported, her voice strained. "She says she's the only one who can communicate with the ship's consciousness. She's trying to reason with it." "Reason with it?" Mason scoffed. "They're harvesting her brain." "She says the Kalthar are not the true enemy," Bloom countered, recalling the message. "We need to know what she knows." The decision was made in a split second. "Dubois, stay with Petrova. Try to establish a link. The rest of Alpha Team, focus on the other scientists. Get them out if you can." Meanwhile, Volkov's Bravo team had slipped away during the initial chaos, following the ship's main energy conduits toward what they hoped was the command nexus. They moved through a series of narrow, winding corridors, the walls pulsating with a soft, internal light. "This place is like a nervous system," Volkov noted, his hand tracing the path of a thick, fiber optic-like cable. "Everything is connected." Fengwei, his second in command, pointed to a branching corridor. "That way. The energy signature is stronger." They followed the conduit to a massive, spherical chamber. In the center of the chamber was a pulsating, crystalline structure that glowed with an intense, white light. It was the size of a small house, and thousands of fiber optic cables converged on it from all directions. "This must be it," Wei whispered. "The central processing unit. Or the heart," Volkov mused. "If this ship is a living organism, that might be its heart." As they approached the central structure, they became aware of a presence in their minds, a vast, cold intelligence that observed them with detached curiosity. "You are the anomaly," the voice spoke in their minds. "The unpredictable variable. Your thought patterns are chaotic. We're here to stop you," Volkov projected, focusing his thoughts with all his mental discipline. "Stop us?" The Kalthar consciousness replied, a hint of something that might have been amusement in its mental tone. "You cannot stop what you do not understand. We are not your enemy. We are your future." "You call this our future?" Wei retorted, gesturing to the chamber around them. Harvesting our minds? Destroying our people? A necessary sacrifice, the Kalthar consciousness stated. Your species has reached a critical juncture. Left to your own devices, you will destroy yourselves. We are offering you a chance to be part of something greater. We'd rather die, Volkov said flatly. A choice you may not have the luxury to make, the Kalthar consciousness replied. Back in the bioneural tank chamber, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Mason's paradox pulse was losing its effectiveness as the Kalthar adapted, their neural networks developing filters to block the disruptive signal. They're learning too fast, Rodriguez yelled, firing his plasma rifle at a pair of advancing Kalthar. We need a new strategy. Bloom's mind raced, processing the tactical data, the cryptic messages from Singla and Petrova, and the overwhelming reality of their situation. The Kalthar were logical, predictable, and vulnerable to paradox. But they were also adaptive and relentless. What if we give them a paradox they can't filter? She thought. Something not based on logic, but on emotion. She keyed her comm Rodriguez, can you modify the paradox emitter to broadcast something else? Something human? Like what? Rodriguez asked, ducking behind a console as a vapor rod blast atomized the wall where he'd been standing. Anything, Bloom said. Music, poetry, a mathematical equation that represents a feeling. Give them something their logical minds can't process. Rodriguez's eyes lit up with understanding. Singla's final message. He used poetry to trap them. Working on it, he said, his fingers flying across the holographic interface of his datapad. Meanwhile, Meta's Alpha team was making progress in extracting the scientists. They had developed a crude but effective method of severing the neural connections using focused plasma bursts, a risky procedure that required incredible precision. We've got 5 of them out, Meta reported. Petrova is still refusing. She says she's close to a breakthrough. A breakthrough in what? Bloom demanded. In understanding them, Petrova's voice suddenly spoke in Bloom's mind, clear and strong. They're not just harvesting our knowledge. They're trying to understand our souls. Our capacity for irrationality. For hope. And what have they learned? Bloom asked. They're terrified, Petrova replied. Of us. And of what's coming. The revelation was stunning. The Kalthar, with all their power and technology, were afraid. I've got it, Rodriguez yelled, interrupting Bloom's thoughts. I'm broadcasting now. He activated the modified emitter. Instead of a wave of logical paradox, a stream of data flooded the Kalthar neural network. It was a complex amalgamation of human expression, Shakespeare's sonnets, the mathematical beauty of a Bach fugue, the raw emotion of a blues guitar riff, the equations describing the chaos of a thunderstorm, the simple, illogical equation of a mother's love for her child. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Kalthar soldiers throughout the chamber froze, not with confusion, but with what looked like pain. Their sapphire eyes flared, then dimmed. Some clutched their heads, their bodies trembling. Others simply collapsed, their biometallic skin cracking and flaking away. Their minds can't handle it, Tanaka said in wonder. They're crashing. But the attack had a side effect. The Vector Prime itself reacted, the entire ship shuddering as if in agony. The lights flickered, and the gravity fluctuated wildly. We've hurt the ship, Bloom realized. And it's fighting back. The walls of the chamber began to convulse, the bioneural tanks cracking and spilling their contents onto the floor. The very air seemed to thicken, becoming difficult to breathe. We have to get out of here, Bloom commanded. Alpha team, fall back to the extraction point. Bravo team, what's your status? We've hit the command core, Volkov's strained voice came over the comm, but the ship is defending itself. We're trapped. Then hold your position, Bloom ordered. We're coming to get you. The mission had evolved again. They were no longer just infiltrators or rescuers. They were now a virus in the system, a dose of existential chaos that was bringing the living ship to its knees. And they had to escape before it took them down with it. The Vector Prime was dying, and it was taking its revenge. The chamber convulsed violently, throwing the team members off their feet. The floor became a treacherous, shifting surface, and the walls seemed to close in on them, the organic architecture twisting into hostile shapes. The Kalthar soldiers who had been disabled by the emotional paradox began to stir, their neural networks rebooting with a new, aggressive purpose. Their sapphire eyes now burned with a cold, focused hatred. "They've adapted," Mason yelled, firing his plasma rifle at a recovering Kalthar. "They've built a firewall against our humanity." The broadcast had worked, but only once. The Kalthar had learned from the experience, and now they were angry. "Alpha Team, fall back," Bloom commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Move, move, move." Meta's team, with the rescued scientists in tow, fought their way toward the extraction point, a predetermined location near the breach they had created. The scientists, weak and disoriented from their ordeal, were a liability, slowing them down and requiring constant protection. "We're not going to make it," Du Bois panted, providing cover fire as Meta helped the elderly scientist navigate the treacherous terrain. "We have to," Meta replied grimly. "No one gets left behind." Meanwhile, Bloom, Mason, and the rest of the team fought to reach Volkov's Bravo team, who were trapped in the command core chamber. The journey was a nightmare. The ship's corridors had become a death trap, with automated defenses emerging from the walls and floors. "This whole place is trying to kill us," Rodriguez said, ducking under a lashing, tentacle-like appendage that shot from the ceiling. "It's the immune system," Bloom realized. "And we're the infection." They finally reached the command core chamber to find Volkov and his team pinned down by a half-dozen Kalthar soldiers, who had erected an energy shield around the central crystalline structure. "We need to get through that shield," Volkov yelled over the comms. "But our weapons are useless against it." "Let me try something," Tanaka said, pulling out a small, cylindrical device. "It's a focused plasma drill, designed for cutting through ship hulls. It might work on their shield." He activated the drill, a high-pitched whine filling the air as a concentrated beam of plasma shot out and struck the energy shield. The shield shimmered and warped under the assault, but it held. "It's not enough," Tanaka grunted, the device overheating in his hands. "We need to create a distraction," Mason said. "Something big." Bloom's mind raced. They had used emotion as a weapon. What else could they use? The Kalthar were logical, predictable. What if they introduced an element of pure, unpredictable chaos? She keyed her comm Rodriguez, "I need you to access the ship's network." "Can you do it?" "Maybe," Rodriguez replied, his fingers flying across his datapad. The emotional broadcast created a backdoor. "Their security is in disarray." "Do it," Bloom ordered. "Find their primary power conduit and overload it." "That could cause a cascading failure throughout the ship," Rodriguez warned. "We might not survive it." "It's a risk we'll have to take," Bloom said. "Do it now." Rodriguez closed his eyes, his consciousness merging with the alien network. He could feel the vast, cold intelligence of the Kalthar, still reeling from the emotional broadcast. He could see the ship's systems, the flow of energy, the network of connections that held it all together. "Found it," he whispered. "The main power conduit. It's beautiful." He sent the command. A surge of energy pulsed through the network, overwhelming the ship's systems. The lights in the chamber flickered and died, replaced by the eerie glow of emergency bioluminescence. The energy shield around the command core flickered and vanished. "Now!" Bloom yelled. The team opened fire, their combined plasma fire overwhelming the Kalthar soldiers, who were caught off guard by the sudden power failure. In a matter of seconds, the room was cleared. Volkov rushed to Bloom's side. "What did you do?" "I gave them a power surge," Bloom replied. "A big one." The ship shuddered again, more violently this time. The floor cracked open, revealing a chasm of swirling energy below. "We need to get out of here," Volkov said. "Now." "But what about this?" Wei asked, pointing to the central crystalline structure. The command core. It's the key to all of this. We can't take it with us, Bloom said. But we can destroy it. Not yet, a voice spoke in their minds. Petrova's voice. Wait. Petrova, where are you? Bloom asked. I'm still in the bioneural tank chamber, she replied. But I'm connected to the ship's consciousness. I can see everything. And you need to know the truth. The truth about what? Bloom demanded. About why they're here, Petrova said. About the threat they're running from. It's real. And it's coming. As if on cue, a new alarm sounded, not from the ship, but from their own comm systems. It was a high-priority alert from the Joint Command Center. Bloom, this is Coleman, the CIA director's voice said, his voice tight with urgency. We're detecting something. Something massive. It just entered the solar system. Bloom's blood ran cold. What is it? We don't know, Coleman admitted. But it's bigger than anything we've ever seen. And it's heading straight for Earth. The team stared at each other in horror. The Kalthar were not the conquerors. They were the vanguard, the first wave of refugees fleeing a far greater power. And humanity was caught in the middle. We have to get out of here, Bloom said, her voice shaking slightly. We have to warn them. But what about the Kalthar? Volkov asked. What do we do now? Petrova's voice answered, filled with a new sense of urgency. You have to help them. They have the knowledge, the technology to fight what's coming. But they can't do it alone. They need our humanity. The choice was clear. They could escape, leave the Kalthar to their fate, and face the coming threat on their own. Or they could stay, and try to forge an alliance with the very beings who had attacked them, in the hope of saving both their species. It was a gamble of cosmic proportions. And the fate of humanity hung in the balance. The revelation hung in the air, a weight heavier than the ship's fluctuating gravity. An enemy greater than the Kalthar was coming. The alien invaders were not conquerors, but desperate refugees. Their mission had changed in the most profound way imaginable. We can't just leave them, Bloom stated, her voice firm with conviction. We need their knowledge. And they need our humanity. But how do we convince them to trust us? Volkov asked. After we just attacked their ship? They're logical, Bloom replied. They'll see the logic of an alliance. But first, we need to show them we're capable of more than just chaos. We need to show them we can be partners. And how do we do that? Mason challenged. By helping them, Bloom said. By stabilizing their ship. By saving their lives. The plan was audacious, almost suicidal. They would have to repair the damage they had caused, working with the Kalthar to prevent the Vector Prime from tearing itself apart. It was a mind heist on a cosmic scale, not to steal information, but to give it away trust, cooperation, and a shared future. First, we need to establish communication, Bloom said. Petrova, can you help us? I'm trying, Petrova's voice replied in their minds. The ship's consciousness is in a state of shock. It's scared. It doesn't understand why you would help it after it tried to kill you. Tell it we're not its enemy, Bloom projected, focusing her thoughts with all her mental discipline. Tell it we have a common enemy. Petrova relayed the message. There was a long pause, a moment of tense silence as the ship's consciousness processed this new, illogical information. The ship is willing to listen, Petrova finally announced. But it's skeptical. It wants proof of your intentions. What kind of proof? Bloom asked. It wants you to repair the damage to its command core, Petrova replied. It's the heart of the ship, and it's failing. The team looked at the massive, pulsating crystalline structure in the center of the chamber. It was cracked and scarred, its light flickering erratically. Repairing it seemed like an impossible task. How do we even begin to do that? Rodriguez asked, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and despair. With this, Petrova said, and a new set of schematics appeared in their minds, transmitted through the ship's consciousness. It was a complex, three-dimensional diagram of the command core, showing its internal structure and the damage they had caused. It's giving us the instructions, Bloom realized. It's trusting us. The schematics were unlike anything they had ever seen. They were a blend of biology and technology, with organic components and energy pathways that defied conventional physics. This is beyond our current technology, Tanaka admitted. I don't know if we can do this. We have to try, Bloom said. The fate of two species depends on it. The team set to work, their exosuits' tools adapted to the alien technology. Rodriguez and Tanaka, with their expertise in robotics and engineering, took the lead, following the schematics with meticulous precision. The work was delicate and dangerous. The command core was unstable, emitting random bursts of energy that could have been fatal. One wrong move could cause a catastrophic failure, destroying the ship and everyone on it. As they worked, Bloom tried to establish a more direct line of communication with the ship's consciousness. She focused her mind, projecting feelings of cooperation and empathy, trying to bridge the gap between their two species. "Why did you attack us?" she asked, not with accusation, but with genuine curiosity. There was a long pause before the ship's consciousness replied, its mental voice filled with a sense of ancient weariness. "We have done this many times," it said. "We find emerging civilizations on the brink of technological singularity. We offer them a choice: join us, or be left behind. Most choose to join. And those who don't?" Bloom asked. "They are a threat," the ship replied. "A threat to themselves and to others. We neutralize them." The cold, clinical logic of it was chilling. The Kalthar saw themselves as galactic custodians, pruning the tree of civilization to prevent it from growing in dangerous directions. "But we're different," Bloom said. "We're not a threat." "Are you not?" The ship challenged. "Your species is defined by conflict, by your capacity for violence and self-destruction. We have seen it 1,000 times. We're also defined by our capacity for love, for sacrifice, for hope," Bloom countered. "That's what you don't understand. That's what makes us strong." The ship's consciousness fell silent, as if considering this new perspective. Meanwhile, the repairs to the command core were progressing. Rodriguez and Tanaka had managed to stabilize the energy flow, and the crystalline structure was beginning to heal itself, its light growing brighter and more steady. "We're almost there," Rodriguez announced, wiping sweat from his brow. "Another few minutes and it should be fully functional." As he spoke, a new alarm sounded, not from the ship, but from their own comm systems. It was an alert from the Joint Command Center. "Bloom, this is Coleman," the CIA director's voice said, his voice filled with panic. "The object, it's changed course. It's not heading for Earth anymore. It's heading for you." The team froze. The greater threat was not just coming, it was here. "What is it?" Bloom demanded. "We don't know," Coleman admitted. "But it's not like the Kalthar. It's something else. Something older." The ship's consciousness suddenly spoke in their minds, its mental voice filled with a terror that was more profound than anything they had felt before. "The silencers," it whispered. "They have found us." The name sent a chill down Bloom's spine. The silencers. It sounded like something out of a nightmare. "Who are they?" she asked. "The end of all things," the ship replied. "A force of cosmic entropy that consumes civilizations, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. They are the reason we flee. The reason we harvest. We are trying to build an army, a collective consciousness powerful enough to stand against them." The stakes had been raised again. They were no longer just fighting for their own survival, but for the survival of consciousness itself. The repairs to the command core were complete. The ship was stable, but it was now a target. "We have to get out of here," Bloom said. "We have to warn Earth." "But the silencers will follow us," the ship's consciousness said. "They will not stop until they have consumed us all." There was a moment of despair, a sense of utter hopelessness. How could they possibly fight a force that could end civilizations? Then, an idea sparked in Bloom's mind, a desperate, audacious gamble. What if we don't run? She asked. What if we fight? With what? The ship challenged. We are one ship. They are a legion. We have something they don't, Bloom replied. We have you. And we have us. She turned to her team. We're not just going to repair this ship. We're going to weaponize it. We're going to turn this living vessel into a weapon of consciousness itself. The plan was insane, but it was also their only hope. They would merge their human creativity, their emotional unpredictability, with the Kalthar's advanced technology and vast knowledge. They would create a new kind of weapon, one that could fight not with matter or energy, but with the very essence of what it meant to be alive. The mind heist was complete. They had come to steal information, but they were leaving with something far more valuable, an alliance, a shared purpose, and a fighting chance against the encroaching darkness. The Vector Prime was no longer just a ship, it was a crucible. Within its living halls, the impossible alliance between human and Kalthar was being forged. The initial distrust and fear had given way to a tense, pragmatic cooperation, fueled by the shared terror of the approaching silencers. The silencers were not just a passive threat. As they drew closer, their influence began to be felt. The Vector Prime systems began to flicker and fail, not from physical damage, but from the sheer, oppressive weight of the silencers' negating presence. They're trying to erase us before they even get here, Tanaka said, his fingers flying across his console as he fought to keep the ship's systems online. We need to draw them in, Bloom said. We need to make them think we're helpless. The plan was a trap, a cosmic game of chicken. They would power down the Vector Prime, making it appear dead and abandoned. They would hide, both physically and mentally, suppressing their own consciousness to a bare minimum. They would present themselves as an easy target, a silent, empty vessel floating in the void. And when the silencers were close enough, when they were fully committed to the act of unmaking, they would spring the trap. They would detonate the paradox bomb, unleashing the full, chaotic force of human consciousness directly into the heart of the enemy. It was a desperate gamble, a plan that relied on the silencers' arrogance and their inability to comprehend the concept of a bluff. Are you sure this will work? Volkov asked, his voice laced with skepticism. It has to, Bloom replied. It's our only shot. The team made their final preparations. The rescued scientists were secured in a reinforced chamber, their minds shielded from the coming psychic battle. The ship's non-essential systems were powered down, plunging the Vector Prime into a state of artificial death. The team gathered in the command core chamber, around the glowing paradox bomb. They were the bait, the trigger, and the architects of humanity's last stand. The silencers are here, the ship's consciousness whispered, its mental voice barely a flicker in the oppressive silence. Bloom felt a presence, a cold, absolute void that seemed to suck the warmth and meaning out of the universe. It was a pressure not on the ears, but on the soul, a weight of pure nothingness that was more terrifying than any physical threat. They're scanning us, Mason said, his voice tight with tension. They think we're dead. Now, Bloom said. Wait for it. The presence grew stronger, a wave of negation that washed over the ship, threatening to extinguish the last flickering embers of their consciousness. Wait for it, Bloom repeated, her mind a fortress of focused intent. The void was all-encompassing now, a suffocating blanket of silence. Bloom felt her own consciousness beginning to fade, her memories and identity dissolving into the overwhelming nothingness. Now! She yelled, her mental voice a scream of defiance. She triggered the paradox bomb. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. A wave of pure, unadulterated meaning exploded from the Vector Prime, a tsunami of art, music, literature, love, and grief that slammed into the silencer's collective mind. The void recoiled, not with pain, but with something akin to confusion. For the first time in its existence, it had encountered something it could not unmake. It had encountered a story. The battle was not fought with ships or weapons, but with concepts. The silencers responded with waves of absolute negation, trying to erase the paradox bomb's payload. But the humans and the Kalthar fought back, feeding more data into the weapon, more stories, more emotions, more meaning. It was a war of narratives, a clash between the absolute silence of the void and the chaotic, beautiful symphony of consciousness. The Vector Prime was the amplifier, the focal point of this cosmic struggle. Bloom and her team were at the epicenter of the battle, their minds merged with the ship's consciousness, their individual identities dissolving into the greater whole. They were no longer just humans, they were the voice of humanity, shouting into the darkness. The silencers were powerful, ancient, and absolute. But they were also static, unchanging, and utterly predictable. They were a force of pure logic, of perfect, mathematical nothingness. And in that, they had a fatal weakness. They could not comprehend the illogical, the emotional, the self-sacrificing nature of the consciousness they sought to destroy. They were gods of math, but they did not understand love. And that was their undoing. The paradox bomb had been fired, a shot heard not across the void, but within the very fabric of existence. The initial wave of human consciousness had struck the silencers, a chaotic explosion of meaning against a wall of perfect, absolute nothingness. For a moment, it seemed to work. The void recoiled, confused by this unexpected resistance. But the silencers were ancient and powerful. They were not so easily defeated. The counterattack was swift and terrible. It was not a wave of energy or a physical assault, but a wave of anti-meaning, a force that actively unwrote the concepts it touched. The beautiful symphony of human consciousness began to fray, its melodies becoming discordant, its stories losing their narrative cohesion. "They're fighting back," Rodriguez yelled, his hands flying across his console as he tried to reinforce the paradox bomb's signal. "They're trying to deconstruct us." The ship shuddered violently, not from physical impact, but from the psychic strain of the battle. The lights flickered, and the air grew cold, a physical manifestation of the silencer's encroaching void. "We need more power," Tanaka grunted, his face pale with exertion. "The paradox bomb is draining the ship's energy reserves." "We can't give it more power," the ship's consciousness stated, its mental voice strained. "We need that power to maintain our structural integrity. The silencer's negation field is literally trying to unmake us." The team was caught in a terrible dilemma. They needed to pour all their energy into the paradox bomb to fight the silencers, but they also needed that energy to keep the ship, and themselves, from being erased from existence. "We have to stabilize the bomb," Bloom decided, her mind racing through the tactical possibilities. "We can't just keep throwing raw data at them. We need to focus it. We need a narrative." "A narrative?" Mason asked, his face etched with concentration as he fought to maintain the psychic link to the bomb. "A story," Bloom clarified. "A single, powerful story that embodies everything we're fighting for. Something they can't deconstruct." "What story?" Volkov asked. "The story of us," Bloom replied. "The story of humanity. Our rise, our struggles, our triumphs, our failures. Our capacity for both incredible destruction and incredible love." It was a monumental task. They had to sift through the entirety of human history and culture, distilling it into a single, coherent narrative that could be loaded into the paradox bomb. "We need to be the editors of our own existence," Bloom said. "We need to find the core of what it means to be human." The team worked with frantic intensity, their minds merged in a shared creative space. They were no longer just soldiers or scientists, they were storytellers, crafting the ultimate defense of their species. They started with the beginning, the spark of consciousness in the African savanna, the first tool, the first word. They moved through the rise and fall of civilizations, the great works of art and literature, the scientific discoveries that reshaped their understanding of the universe. They didn't shy away from the darkness. They included the wars, the genocides, the cruelty and hatred that had plagued their species. But they framed it not as a failure, but as a struggle, a part of the complex, contradictory tapestry of their existence. And through it all, they wove a thread of hope, of resilience, of the unbreakable human spirit. They told the story of individuals who had sacrificed themselves for others, of artists who had created beauty in the face of despair, of scientists who had pushed the boundaries of knowledge for the sake of all humanity. It was a story of messy, chaotic, beautiful, terrible, glorious humanity. As they crafted the narrative, the battle outside raged on. The silencer's negation field grew stronger, and the Vector Prime began to break apart, whole sections of the ship dissolving into nothingness. "We're running out of time," the ship's consciousness warned. "The structural integrity is down to 20%. "Almost there," Bloom replied, her mind a whirlwind of images and concepts. "We just need the ending." The ending. The most important part of any story. It had to be a statement of defiance, a declaration of their right to exist, not in spite of their flaws, but because of them. And then, she had it. The perfect ending. It wasn't a grand, epic battle or a miraculous technological breakthrough. It was something simpler, more profound, and more human. It was the image of a child, born in the midst of the chaos, looking up at the stars with a sense of wonder and curiosity. It was the promise of a new beginning, the continuation of the story, no matter how dark the present might seem. It was the ultimate act of defiance against a force of absolute negation. The simple, illogical, beautiful act of choosing to create new life in the face of certain destruction. "That's it," Bloom whispered. "That's the ending." They loaded the final piece of the narrative into the paradox bomb. The crystalline matrix glowed with an intense, white light, pulsating with the weight of a species' entire history and its hopes for the future. "Now," Bloom said, "let's show them who we are." They unleashed the narrative. It was not a chaotic explosion, but a focused, coherent beam of pure story, a direct injection of meaning into the heart of the void. The effect was immediate and devastating. The silencer's negation field buckled, unable to deconstruct a narrative that embraced its own contradictions. The void recoiled, not with confusion, but with something akin to pain. They were forcing the silencers to experience humanity, to feel its joys and sorrows, its triumphs and failures. They were forcing a force of pure logic to confront the beautiful, terrifying illogic of life. And the silencers could not handle it. The void began to collapse in on itself, its perfect, mathematical structure unable to process the chaotic, emotional data. The narrative beam struck the void. For a breathtaking moment, the story of humanity, a child's wonder born amidst chaos, was the only thing that existed in the silent space between stars. The oppressive negation of the silencers buckled, its perfect, mathematical structure unable to process the beautiful, terrifying illogic of a species that would choose to create while facing annihilation. And then, the void laughed. It was not a sound of mirth, but a psychic wave of pure, condescending ridicule. The pressure lifted. The cold, encroaching darkness receded. Inside the Vector Prime, the frantic, life-or-death struggle ceased, leaving the command core chamber in a state of stunned silence. "What happened?" Mason asked, his mind still reeling from the psychic battle. "Did we win?" A terrible, chilling thought pierced Bloom's consciousness, originating not from her team, but from the ship itself, from Dr. Elena Petrova. It was a lie, Petrova's mental voice whispered, filled with a horror far deeper than any they had yet faced. All of it. The silencers, they aren't real. The team stared at each other, the dawning realization a physical blow. The ship's consciousness, now speaking with Petrova's clarity and sorrow, confirmed their fears. The silencers were a fabrication. A phantom. A weapon of psychological warfare so advanced, so perfectly tailored, that it had turned humanity's greatest strength, its capacity for hope and storytelling, into a weapon against itself. The Kalthar, in their cold, analytical way, had studied humanity. They understood fear, but they could not comprehend hope. So they created a fear so great, a threat so absolute, that it would short-circuit that hope. They projected their own existential dread onto their captives, a final, desperate mind game to break their spirit before the final harvest. They watched us, the ship's consciousness explained, its tone filled with a new, profound shame. They let us build our paradox bomb. They let us pour our entire history into it. They wanted to see the full extent of our defiance, to measure the power of the human spirit, so they could finally understand and eradicate it. The realization was soul-crushing. Their ultimate weapon, their defiant last stand, had been a science experiment for their captors. They hadn't been fighting for their survival, they had been performing in a cosmic laboratory. The reprieve was over. The Kalthar, having learned all they needed to from the charade, renewed their attack with a terrifying, focused fury. All around the chamber, walls shimmered and reformed, not into the chaotic, damaged structures of before, but into sleek, angular weapon emitters. The floor became a grid of activation panels. The very air crackled with a new, more potent form of energy. They adapted, Rodriguez said, his voice hollow with despair. They used our own attack to analyze our weaknesses. They know everything we know. The Kalthar soldiers who flooded the chamber were different. Their biometallic skin had a new, darker sheen. Their movements were even more precise, their sapphire eyes burning with an unnerving, focused intelligence. They were no longer just harvesting, they were exterminating. The team's weapons were now useless. Plasma rounds were absorbed by personal energy fields. The paradox emitters, which had once caused confusion, were now met with neural dampeners that rendered their signals inert. "We have nothing left," Dubois whispered, firing her last plasma round ineffectively at an advancing Kalthar. "They beat us. They were surrounded. Outnumbered. Outgunned." Their minds, exhausted from the psychic battle, were sluggish, their tactical options reduced to zero. This was it. The end of the line. The struggle was over, and death was the only remaining outcome. Bloom looked at her team, Mason's grim resignation, Rodriguez's defeated slump, Meta's final, defiant stand, and felt a wave of despair so profound it was almost a relief. They had tried. They had failed. The lead Kalthar raised its vapor rod, the tip glowing with a light that seemed to absorb all other colors. It aimed directly at Bloom. There was no malice in its action, only the cold, final logic of a task being completed. This was the moment of termination. And then, the universe screamed. It was not a psychic scream, but a physical one. A sound so powerful it tore through the Vector Prime's hull like paper. The entire ship shuddered violently, thrown off its axis. The Kalthar soldiers stumbled, their perfect synchronization broken for the first time by a raw, physical force they had not anticipated. "What is that?" Mason yelled, picking himself up from the floor. Bloom looked at a view screen that had flickered to life, showing the space outside the vessel. And she saw the miracle. A fleet of ships. But not human ships, not entirely. They were hybrids, a fusion of human design and something else, sleek, angular, and bristling with weapons that glowed with the same gravitothermal energy as the Kalthar vapor rods. They moved with impossible speed and agility, tearing into the Vector Prime's defenses with a ferocity that was utterly, shockingly human. The backup team, Bloom breathed, a wave of incredulous hope washing over her. The other half of Operation Mindstorm. From the moment the mission had been conceived, it had been a two-pronged gamble. Bloom's team was the scalpel, designed to infiltrate the mind of the enemy and create an opening. But if the scalpel failed, if it was captured or destroyed, a hammer was waiting in the wings. A new voice crackled over their comms, a voice they all recognized. General Marcus Thorne. The military strategist who had been captured in the initial attack, presumed dead or harvested. "Thorne here," he said, his voice calm and commanding. "Sorry we're late. We had to let you soften them up for us." The Kalthar were in chaos. Their logical models, which had accounted for every human variable, had failed to include the most critical one, a hidden reserve force. They had been so focused on the mind virus within their ship that they had neglected the physical threat outside. They had been checkmated by a simple, classic pincer movement. The backup team, codenamed Operation Forge, had been Thorne's brainchild. Composed of the world's most elite Black Ops soldiers and scientists, they had been hidden in a deep space facility, working in secret. Their mission, to reverse engineer the Kalthar technology that Bloom's team was sent to steal. But they had a head start. Using the fragmented data bursts from Singla and the real-time tactical feed from Bloom's team, they had developed countermeasures at an astonishing rate. "We're breaching the starboard cargo bay," Thorne transmitted. Get your people to the rendezvous point. We'll cover you. The main team, galvanized by this sudden turn of events, fought back with renewed vigor. They were no longer prisoners on their way to execution. They were the anvil, about to receive the hammer. This way! Bloom yelled, leading her team through the chaos. The Kalthar, now fighting a war on two fronts, were in disarray. Their perfect formations were broken, their flawless tactics disrupted by the sheer, unpredictable violence of the human assault. They reached the rendezvous point, a massive cargo bay where the backup team was cutting through the hole with plasma torches that mirrored the Kalthar's own technology. The breach opened, and a squad of soldiers in exosuits more advanced than their own poured through, their weapons firing pulses of energy that shattered the Kalthar biometallic armor. Thorn himself stepped through the breach, his face grim but determined. He clapped a heavy hand on Bloom's shoulder. "Good work, Agent," he said. "You gave us everything we needed." The two teams merged, a wave of reinforcements and fresh firepower that turned the tide of the battle. The main team, with their intimate knowledge of the ship's layout and the Kalthar's psychology, guided the backup team, directing them to critical targets. The Kalthar were shocked. Their collective mind, a god of logic and calculation, could not process the sheer, bloody-mindedness of the human strategy. They had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and outfought. They had faced the human mind directly and had lost. And now they were facing the human body, and it was just as unpredictable and deadly. The final objective was clear: destroy the overmind, the central consciousness of the ship. "We need to hit the command core," Bloom told Thorn. "But it's protected by a psychic shield." "We've got something for that," Thorn replied, nodding to one of his scientists. The scientist held up a device that looked like a tuning fork. "It's a resonator," the scientist explained. "Based on your team's data, we've calibrated it to broadcast a specific emotional frequency on a loop. Something simple, pure, and utterly devastating to their hive mind." "What frequency?" Bloom asked. "Sacrifice," the scientist said simply. "The concept of one individual dying for another, with no logical gain. The ultimate paradox." The combined force fought its way back to the command core chamber. The room was a wreck, but the central crystalline structure still pulsed with a malevolent light. "Now!" Thorn commanded. The scientist activated the resonator. A low hum filled the air, inaudible to the ear but felt in the bones and the soul. It was a pure, unwavering broadcast of selfless sacrifice. At the same time, Bloom and her team focused their minds, not on a grand narrative, but on a single, personal memory: Dr. Arjun Singla smashing his own tank, declaring, "You are gods of math, but you do not understand love." The two-pronged attack was too much. The psychic shield around the command core flickered and died. "Fire!" Thorn yelled. Every weapon in the room opened up on the crystalline heart of the Vector Prime. Plasma, gravitothermal pulses, and kinetic rounds slammed into the core. It cracked, then shattered, exploding in a silent, blinding flash of white light. The effect was instantaneous. Throughout the ship, Kalthar soldiers collapsed, their sapphire eyes going dark. The living ship gave one last, shuddering groan and fell silent. The oppressive psychic presence vanished, replaced by a profound and peaceful quiet. It was over. They had done it. They had faced a technologically superior, intellectually daunting enemy and had won. Not with a bigger gun, but with a better plan. Not with superior logic, but with superior humanity. In the aftermath, the two teams stood amidst the wreckage of the Vector Prime. They looked at the disabled alien Leviathan, attuned to a species that had underestimated its prey. Thorn stood beside Bloom, looking out at the stars through the breached hull. "They thought our minds were just data to be harvested," he said. "They never understood that our greatest strength isn't what we know, but why we choose to know it. They never understood sacrifice." Bloom nodded, a wave of exhaustion and relief washing over her. They had come here to steal a weapon. In the end, they hadn't needed to. They had brought their own. The human mind, in all its chaotic, emotional, illogical, and self-sacrificing glory, had proven to be the most powerful weapon in the universe. Humanity had won. And the universe would never be the same.